This is Gunnar Donje. I am the Vice President of PASS, and today we are here with Kenny Schachter, who is an artist, collector, curator, dealer, writer, all of the above.
Teacher, professor.
Teacher, yes, teaching class at SVA right now. I was wondering if you would like to start off with telling people about sort of your entry into the art world and the unorthodox path you followed to get here.
Well, it's funny because Jerry Saltz, the critic, who's a friend of mine, and I don't mean this in any derogatory sense, only with respect, but he just wrote a book, 33 Rules How to Be an Artist. And for me, what I say to my students and have thought personally is that what I love about art so much is there are no rules. It's really a field where you can create your own destiny in such a profound way. So I'm a complete autodidact. And like I said, I'm teaching now at School of Visual Arts. I teach art and economics on the graduate level at the University of Zurich. I've written in books for MIT, for Springer Verlag, curated shows in galleries and museums. And yet I studied in university philosophy and political science. And no one in my family was involved in fine art. And if you can imagine, I never went, not only did I not enter an art gallery until the right age of 27, but I didn't even know that galleries existed. And the thing is, studying philosophy and political science, I was considering getting a PhD in philosophy, but even with a PhD in philosophy, there's still no job that really is available other than teaching, which I love teaching, and it's a very important part of my life. But nevertheless, at that time, as a college graduate, with the prospect of, I didn't want to spend my entire life doing some shit job where I would always be looking for something else and always be spending my entire work life waiting for something else to happen, whether it was a holiday or whatever it was. So I just really, in a funny way, I defined my career through the negative. Like I knew I was going to get a job where I had to do the same routine every day. I knew I wasn't going to have a sit-down office job. I knew I wasn't going to work 9 to 5 or 9 to 10, anywhere like that. So with that in mind, I enrolled in law school. And again, like the last thing that would ever appeal to me, despite like the aspirations of my family, would be to be a lawyer. I mean, again, so I enrolled in law school and I thought I would take a joint degree in philosophy, but I ended up not doing that. But anyway, I thought that would be a good place to hide away and figure out what it is. I really wanted to be self-defined and self-actualized to the point where I refused to capitulate and do some shit job that I would regret for the rest of my life. Life is so short. And one of the beautiful things about living in a free, quasi-democratic society is the opportunity to create your own destiny and your own job. And really what appealed to me very early on was this notion of wedding together something creative and something entrepreneurial. And that was pretty much the only thing I knew. So again, like I never applied myself to the LSATs or law school. When I got my grades, I literally broke down in tears because they were so bad. But I was able to get into one law school. And I went there, and again, I had zero intent to practice. But I thought, like, for me, law school was like military school for the head. And when I took the bar exam, I literally had like 1,100 pages of bar review notes to memorize. And it was that kind of discipline which I found the most helpful and the most appealing. So in the beginning of law school, you know, you asked me, so this is going to go on and on and on. And having a family and kids, I'm always for a captive audience. So that's pretty much why I teach, to have people that are locked in a room, having no other option other than to listen to me. But I started working, I couldn't bear law school. I mean, literally, it was just, it was annoying to hear like many people raising their hands, more to hear themselves speak than to answer a question. It was more like people making loads of statements. In any event, I basically, for all intents and purposes, I dropped out while remaining in 3/4 into my first year. And I told everyone I was in night school and my family and my bosses from various jobs I had, but there was no night school. And whenever classes were a requirement to passing, I would find out and then drop an ad. And I did a series of jobs, everything from working on the floor of the American Stock Exchange until I realized I couldn't add fractions without using my fingers. So anything mathematically inclined was certainly not going to be a job for me. And then I did a lot of freelance writing, which did prove helpful because I think being a writer, it's especially in art, it's so important to have clarity and to be concise and to be able to communicate with people. And the most important gift or the most important role for a writer is to be able to communicate with people, whether they're art professionals, PhDs, curators, critics. At the same time, you have to be able to make yourself clear to people that are not full-time in the trade of art. And I think I learned to write in a very concise way through my legal experience. But in any event, after law school, after the bar exam, I went to work for a fashion company, and you wouldn't know it from the way that I typically walk around in my old trade Adidas pants, vintage, which are quite becoming trendy right now in spite of, but seriously, so I literally handed out my resume to over 100 garment businesses in a building in New York City because I just thought being a designer was a way to be creative and make money. And again, like at this point, I had never been to a commercial art gallery, although I did frequent in Washington, D.C., the Smithsonian, the National Museum, the East Wing of the National Museum. So I was exposed for the first time to the works of the likes of Cy Twombly and Andy Warhol and Basquiat and all of these artists. So really, I was like, I always call myself like an idiot savant. And I got exposed to, I mean, obviously there's some innate kind of connection that I had. But again, like once I found art, and I'll get to that in a second, but once I found what it was that I could see myself falling hard in love with, which I have, and I do. I mean, I don't go to movies, I'm movie illiterate. I spent 15 years living in London. I went to see the Book of Mormon. That was the only theatrical performance I saw in a city famed for its theater. I don't read fiction because like what happens, if you ever read like fiction about what we've been through since 9/11, you would not carry on reading it due to lack of belief because things are so ludicrous as to what really happens in life. But anyway, so I went into the fashion business and quickly found out that there was no kind of cerebral intellectual element to like spanning out a group of neckwear and ties, which is what I was doing, and trying to sell them to mom and pop stores and then having to face a committee of 12 people in order to approve a purchase of like $1,200. And I quickly quit that job. I won't get into the detail of the fact that I was allergic to silk, and the person who I was working for was the grandson of Nino Cerruti, a fashion designer, and I had to rub the ties all over my face to induce an allergy attack to extricate myself from the company because he was going downhill due to a gambling addiction. But the point is that the person who was backing the fashion company was a very big, at the time, collector of emerging art. And while I was procrastinating after my foray into fashion, which lasted about 5 minutes, somebody dragged me to the estate sale of Andy Warhol when he died. And I have to admit that at the time, though I've learned to appreciate it and why, historical resonance and kind of paradigm shifting body of work that Andy Warhol did, but I just went there to kill some time between seeking another job. And I went to Sotheby's where they were selling Warhol's estate, and what I thought would be a load of Warhols turned out to be his collection, everything from cookie jars and necklaces and Rolexes to a vast collection of contemporary art, a lot of which he gained through trading with his peers, like David Hockney and Robert Rauschenberg and all of these pillars of art. And when I went to see this preview, which again, like going to previews for auctions, I super highly recommend to anyone remotely interested in art, because you could really go up and kick the tires and get close to the art and see a wide array of what's, in the commercial floor at the given time. Anyway, so when I went to the Warhol estate sale with little or no expectations, which I've learned to have a lot in my professional and personal life, they were gearing up for what was a yearly May contemporary art sale in Sotheby's building. And to see all of the art that I had seen, I literally so naively thought that art somehow went from the artist to a museum. I had no notion, and really in a sense, this has defined my entire life. I had no notion of commercial dissemination system with which art enters the stream of commerce. So because I never worked for a gallery, I never worked for a museum, but once I I had this kind of eureka moment. I started to curate shows and make art myself and find like people my age, people that had been to various art schools, and I started to do these hit and run art shows. But at that time, I had miraculously passed the bar exam, and in between jobs, I took a freelance job as a writer in a law firm that just was desperate for a body to fulfill this kind of motion practice. So I took this job, and then I immediately started like dealing to other dealers, buying art, and then selling it to other dealers. And the way I started, funny enough, was that like after the initial exposure at Sotheby's, this is one very long sentence, sorry. After my exposure at Sotheby's, I went to the first gallery I ever stepped foot in, and to this day, it like I still get like taken aback every time I think about it. When you walk into a gallery, and even though things have changed in the last 25 years more than in the past 250 years, I was looked at up and down, and they immediately make these kind of, you know, they pigeonhole you into whatever role they think you assume. Poor person, rich person, they look at your shoes, your way you dress, the way you carry yourself, your age, and all of this. Anyway, I was just completely, I never witnessed a commercial sector where this kind of the heaviness of the judgments and exclusionary mentality was so overwhelming. Anyway, I didn't have any money, and I saw the Cy Twombly print show, and immediately I had this I was overwhelmed with the desire to like buy something. And I had just taken on this freelance job as a lawyer, and I went to Chase Manhattan Bank in New York, and I rocked up and said, I'd like a $10,000 loan, please, to buy some art. And I have to say, if you've ever given a command to a dog that the dog doesn't understand, and they turn their head sideways, that's pretty much the reaction of the banker. And he looked at me like I just landed from Mars, and I was out of my mind, or I would say worse. And he said no, flatly, obviously. And then I just had the manager of the law firm I was working at, and they phoned into the bank and said, look, he's on this salary. And I got a loan and immediately started never selling to collectors, because like I say, which is largely true, even though I've sold, to this day, I've sold Cézanne and Picasso and Matisse and Manet and some extraordinary pieces. But I've always been a kind of dealer-to-dealer artist, because I can't sell crack to a crackhead. I'm not a salesman. I love art because of the academic side to it. I love learning every day. I love going. What I love about art is that it's sort of like you can never learn about art because it changes every minute of every day. And that's part of the allure. I love the kind of cerebral side, like I said before. I love teaching it. I only teach so I'll learn more. I love the rigor of it and the kind of depth of it, even though it has all the attributes and characteristics of any other commercial field, more so now than ever.
Yeah, I noticed that a couple artists seem to keep coming up in terms of, you know, when I was looking into the artists that you were interested in and influenced you, it was, you know, Paul Tech was in there, but also Vito Acconci.
Right, I mean, basically, I was, when I first came across the work of Vito, it was this famous piece that he grew to regret ever doing called Seedbed. And he built a fake floor in a gallery in 1972 and was masturbating under the floor for hours a day on any given day during the course of the show. And you get the point, the entendre of Seedbed and him releasing his seed on the, but basically it was an act that was meant to be a kind of act of antagonism to the art market in a movement of art called dematerialization. And in a way, Vito was a poet. And then he said that when he was writing his concrete poetry, the words started to push off the page in a physical sense, because if you look at the way he actually committed the words to paper, the nature of how the words relate to each other takes on a pictorial aspect. And I have to say, like being a writer and an artist, I very much gravitate toward artworks that incorporate text. And there's a long history from Braque, collaging newspaper, and Picasso to people like Christopher Wool and Lawrence Weiner and Ed Ruscha, various artists that over the course of history include text almost as a form of like depicting a landscape in a certain sense. But then again, like, I just thought, this guy just masturbated in the gallery, albeit it was in 1972, and I thought, wow, maybe art could be a field for me, because I could certainly, that's certainly something that comes quite naturally to me and many others, I'm sure. But I thought, but in all honesty, it was like, I just love this nihilistic kind of notion that anything, it's kind of very rebellious and a big kind of like fuck you to society or the world, where having gone through the rigors of law school and being a kind of like contrarian my whole life and an anti-disciplinarian. So in a way, like my entire career is really, even though I do so many disparate things, really in my mind, it's under the rubric of there's such a continuity in the thread of what I do. And it relates to like Vito jacking off under the floor. And in a way, it's not because he's just doing something which is so in the face of traditional notions of beauty and aesthetics, but it's also the fact that what is repulsive and grotesque and juvenile to one person is beautiful and pleasing in more ways than one to another person. And I have to say, like Paul Tech made these pieces in wax where it was like a repost to Donald Judd and minimalism, where he actually borrowed, like from Andy Warhol, a Brillo box and stuck this shard of exposed meat or flesh in it. And he was trying, like, while Donald Judd was cultivating this like kind of closeness to industrial means of fabrication and taking the human hand out of art, Paul Tech was showing, like, when you're a young person your age, students, or you see a lot of people in this COVID era walking around, and if you go to Central Park on a Sunday or a Saturday today, against what you would read about in the press, where there are like people keeling over in Madison Avenue and dying in New York City, it's very much not the case. And a lot of it could be mistaken hubris of these people walking around with no masks and jogging around the reservoir in Central Park like nothing's ever changed. But I think, like with Paul Tech and with Vito and a lot of the artists that I relate to, they show the vulnerability in life, just the fragility of things, and poking at these structural authoritarian models that exist in society in the United States even today more than they ever have in the past. So I think, like, a lot of like everything in art, even the avant-garde, becomes like an academy. And especially, like, I always joke that, like, I ran away from big business and ran into art, and then art became a bigger business than the business I was running away from. And I remember when I first peeled off the law and into the art field, I couldn't believe how conservative this industry was and how backward looking, in a sense, and how the artists were like these little cottage industry entrepreneurs and really weren't interested in pushing boundaries and trying to, you have to, like, in an act of like creative destruction, like take something down to get past it and to do something positive. And I never, like, my writing could be a little polemic. I've had death threats. I've had lawsuits threatened. I've had people threaten me in restaurants, like in New York City, and try to beat me up in Hong Kong. I've been through all of this, but if you knew me better than you've known me in the first 5 minutes, and I've rambled on nonstop, but like, I'm a pussycat and I'm so passionate about art. I must say I spend half my time doing stuff for free or for like pennies on the dollar, like teaching a 6-hour lecture at SVA during this period where we're all on lockdown on Zoom, like we are now. But like my writing, I get paid very, very little. Teaching, I've been teaching since '92. I just think that you spend your whole life gaining wisdom and gaining knowledge. And then part of what I do is so much built into the notion that I feel compelled to give back and to create transparency in an industry that is like the mafia with like omerta, where there's like this sworn code of silence. And really in the art world, like I said, it's such a backwards looking place in terms of like sharing information and being transparent. So I really feel I never set out to be like this Robin Hood stealing information from the rich and giving it to the aspiring rich. But really the feedback I get eggs me on, because I get such incredible affirmation. Look, from people like you calling me up from Stanford when I'm like a self-taught person who never went to art school in my life. But I really feel like I can, the best feedback, more than like doing a deal for $5 million, is like getting feedback from people that I've inspired them, and I made it seem like things are more optimistic and more possible and more probable in a better way than it is to what they've normally been spoon-fed, that, art is a terribly closed down place only for the rich and only for the few, which is really not the case. I mean, you could build an art collection for under $500 a piece, and I can help you do that. Not that that's something I do generally, but there's been a lot of changes over the past 30 years, like I mentioned before. And first and foremost is Instagram has been an absolute like hierarchical busting democratic wrecking ball through the way that I grew up in the fine art world. And now it has made art so much more readily accessible that to me, like my kids always mock me for being on Instagram the whole time. But like, I'm even worse now in the circumstances we find ourselves in today than even before, if that's possible. Simply for the fact that I get to communicate 24 hours a day while I work by myself, stuck in my room in New York City, and I get to communicate with a broad array of people from all walks of life, and that gives me a great deal of satisfaction.
Yeah, you walked right into my next question. Just thinking about all those different artistic influences that you were talking about, all these personas and personalities who were sort of against the grain and sort of provocateurs, but then also the role of Instagram and what that plays within the art world. I've heard you say before, Instagram reduces the hierarchical nature of the art world.
The hair is standing up on my head when I think about how Instagram has changed our world, really in such a deep, deep way. And there's two things that come to mind. Like when I started as a curator and an artist in the 90s, in the late 80s and early 90s, if you wanted to convey visually what you were doing, if I was pitching a show to a gallery or a museum to curate, or if I was sending out images of my own artwork to somebody else within the art world, I would have to take a sheet of photographic slides, and they were about 1 inch square or 2 inches by 1 inch, and you would put them in a manila envelope, stamp it up, and send it off into the snail mail and wait for a response. And during the recession in 1990s, which was way worse in terms of the art market than the recent mid-level to small gallery crisis that's been recently paid so much lip service in the press since 2008. But things were way worse when the art world was radically smaller, like it was in the 90s. But literally, most galleries would take these envelopes of unsolicited slides, visual attempts of trying to get exposure into a gallery, and they would throw them directly into the garbage can without even looking at them. And there was one famed dealer who since died called Feature. His name was Hudson. He had one name, and he had a gallery initially in Chicago and then in New York City. And he was the only person besides me and a few other people, literally you can count on one hand, in the whole of New York City in the early 90s that would entertain looking at unsolicited, non-represented emerging artists, be they 20 years old or 80 years old. You're still emerging if you have no audience or no way to showcase your work. And that was the only way that you could communicate visually what you were doing. And it's shocking to think about now. And I remember there was one artist, Brian Calvin, who shows at Anton Kern. He's a very well-known, successful artist. And he had sent me like a 2-page unsolicited letter about asking for advice about what he could do to launch a career. It was only from Ohio, not like from, the depths of some faraway land that he was writing from. And I wrote back in the brusquest terms, not meaning to be short about it, but I just wrote back, moved to New York. And he recounted years later, I had forgotten about it. But really, that was the only opportunity you had if you wanted to get a career in the fine art, was to be in the trenches, whether it was in New York or in Germany, in Cologne, or Dusseldorf before Berlin came on the scene. Los Angeles, not so much, because even though there was a great history of art schools in LA, with people like Mike Kelly and John Baldessari and Ed Ruscha and Bruce Nauman, and all of these great leading lights of contemporary art teaching in LA, there was little or no art market until the last 5 to 10 years in LA. They would just go to New York and buy stuff, or go to art fairs like in Basel. So first and foremost, Instagram. I curated a show in LA at this small art fair called Felix in February, and doing things in the unprofessional way that I'm so good at. I had to cram 11 artists into this shitty little tiny hotel room to stage this exhibition. But 6 of the 11 artists I came across on Instagram. And really one of the most profound experiences I had was somehow somebody was following me and I started following them, and I looked at their artwork, and I was just, it's incredible because it has nothing to do with who you know. It has nothing to do with how they got to where they got, like whether it's taking advantage of familial relations or professional friendships or people you know. this or that. Art in and of itself, like that's really what Instagram means to me. And that was a half-baked way of expressing myself. But let's just say that I saw the work of this artist and it appealed to me. I didn't know who the hell this person was from, could have been anything. And I just wrote a letter to this person and I said, who are you? It was a woman there were often depictions of a naked woman in these paintings, yet they were somehow quite humorous. I was very engaged by them. And I just wrote back, who are you? What are you? How old are you? You married? Are you gay? You straight? Do you have kids? Do you not have kids? And I wasn't being flippant about it. I just really wanted to know. All I ever saw were these digital visual representations on my phone, but somehow they caught my eye out of all the plethora of information that you're exposed to. And I started corresponding with this person, and she turned out to be a woman living in Austria of Hungarian descent who was married. Her parents had survived the Holocaust. She was depicting herself naked because one of her parents smuggled a diary out of the concentration camp. She couldn't bring herself to read it until only a short while ago, like a decade ago. And then she was depicting herself like physically in the way that her parents had to conduct their everyday lives in this camp horror scenario. But she did so in such an ambiguous way, infused with humor and light. And I mean, I was just so taken aback. And I forged a relationship with this woman and I showcased her work. And it was only like the first time she's ever shown in the US, despite having a very small, not terribly commercial gallery in Austria where she lives. And as a result, I sold 10 of her pieces to some fabulous collectors, one with a private museum. And as a result, she's now in a group show in New York, and she's got a gallery in New York City for a one-person show coming up. And like, I mean, I own her pieces, and in no way was this for me, this joy that I felt had nothing to do with the commercial aspect that perhaps some works I acquired could be worth subsequently more money. That was absolutely no relation to the satisfaction that this woman wrote to me and said that I changed her life. That's what she said to me, quote unquote, that she's painting ferociously. It's created in her this kind of like this second wind of really going into the studio and tackling her work with a newfound sense of like, you know, energy and devotion. And really that to me says it all. So number one is that you could be rich, poor, connected or not, but when you come across imagery on Instagram, and like I said, like you DM me, I get in touch with every single person that DMs me. And like I said, some of it is not so pleasant. I get weird sun situation coming here after a day of rain in New York. But I get the crazy, I mean, I get women and men sending me naked pictures and everything you can imagine I get. Most of it is really positive, that people engage with me on the level that they can't believe that I get back in touch with them. And whether it's by email or DM, it's my obligation, I feel, to open up this game to people so they could feel inspired to engage, because it's a blessing that I feel so lucky to be able to live a life in the fine arts. It's taken me decades to get to this point where I've crafted my own sort of identity and my own commercial manner of doing business. But it's extraordinary to me that people care, people want to communicate, and I'd be that I can affect someone's life from someone who never went to art school. I'm teaching, I've always taught like seminars which relate to my study of philosophy. I've always taught these more kind of theoretical based classes. And then I gave a lecture at School of Visual Arts in November, and I thought I just moved to New York and I've been teaching in Europe for so many years. I just went to the school and said, can you please hire me to teach? And then they called me up to school and they said, please come and sign up for, there's like my dark side and my light side. And you see the way
I was just having that same problem.
It's true, we all have all our different. Anyway, so I went to SVA to sign the papers, and I said, by the way, what's the class I'm teaching? And she said, well, it's Tuesday mornings from 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock. And I was like, oh shit, what have I gotten myself into? And then she said it was a studio class for fine art seniors. So I took a drawing class in law school and a sculpting class in law school. But other than that, this is the first time in my entire life I've ever been in a studio class. And I joke that I'm in the art world commercially, and as a result, I never get to speak about art, because in my business, nobody wants to hear about art. They want to know where is the artist showing, who's buying it, who's selling it, who's writing about it, what auctions has it been in, what international biennials and so forth. But nobody wants to talk about what does the art mean? What does it mean to you? How does it move you? What is the creative process? And all of these things. Like the reason I slept like 15 hours yesterday was like it sort of happens to me after every class. It's like really kind of like you're giving so much and I'm gaining so much from the discourse with the students, but there's something like, I used to joke that artists are so selfish and so egomaniacal that it's kind of like they're sucking the air right out of your mouth when they speak to you. They're always looking over their shoulder, even though I'm one of them, looking for the next opportunity. And they're always trying to figure out, using you as a stepping stone to get to Hauser worth ultimately. But the fact is that there's been clinical studies, and I did volunteer work in a hospital in London, in Chelsea and Westminster, probably the only hospital in the world that's accredited as a museum. And they have a very proactive program where they commission artworks for the public spaces and the rooms in all of the different wards. And as a result, they've seen shorter hospital stays requiring less medication. So really, like every single day of my life, I rub my nose against a drawing, a painting. My house is rammed with art from top to bottom. Even though I've only been living here for 9 months, you would think I was living here 25 years. And it's because that, art is like having a Labrador retriever or something. It reduces your blood pressure, and it's just a window into another, world of thought and contemplation. And on that level, I have this kind of like messianic relationship to art, and that's why I love teaching, because for me, it means sustenance, it means a way of making a living for my family, and it means engaging, but it's so fulfilling on so many different levels that I would basically do what I do for free. And then to get to the, I can't even remember, but to get to your other question, there's something really important. There's been 1 million websites to date, 1 million platforms that have started with art as their foundation. So there's Artsy, and there's Paddle 8 recently went out of business. There's ArtNet, with whom I write for. There is Art News, all of these different internet sites. But off the record, just between me and you and whoever might be tuning into this, they all suck. None of them are model, not even the one I write for. Half the content is paid for content. I mean, they just fired their entire staff. I'm the only freelance. I mean, that's really not a funny matter, because so many institutions and galleries and museums and auction houses are having to furlough and let go so many people, because we're not in an economic downturn. We're in the first time in history in like 100 years, it's more than 100 years, where the economy is grown to a complete standstill. It's not even an economic downturn, because macroeconomically speaking, fundamentally, the world is in the same place it was, except that every public business has had to shut their doors as a result of this crazy ass virus. And the fact is that it's not funny anymore, but forget that. Talking to a period before that, I mean, I guarantee you like 3 out of the 5 names I just mentioned will be out of business in the next 3 to 5 years. Because they just, like I said before, art is such a backward-looking industry, steeped in such ridiculous conservatism, way beyond what anyone, I mean, like I've said before, like I thought when you go into the art world, people are getting wasted, drinking absinthe, cutting their organs off, and going nuts and hanging from the chandelier. But it was just really the opposite. And what I loved first and foremost about Instagram was the fact that I loved things that just happened by accident in a certain sense. And it's like Instagram was never created whatsoever with the idea that it'd be a platform to foster the arts. And in a way, it's been the biggest shift that I've seen in 30 years that has had just a monumental impact on the way we see art, experience art, buy art. Every which way you can cut it, it's been touched upon through Instagram. Just like the DM, I got in touch with people. I've taken meetings like with kids that are 17, 18, 19, 20, as well as I got in touch with Richard Prince and ended up in his studio in upstate New York, because I like old cars and he likes it, but we got in touch via Instagram. So, I mean, again, like this is a really important thing. I work by myself. Part of the reason I'm blabbing on so much to you is that no one listens to me and my family, and I'm not like typically in the art world where I have a gallery and there's a constant flow of audience back and forth. I very much work unto myself. And with Instagram and with these platforms, which is the only reason I'm here talking to you, is that it opens up this kind of um, two-way street of dialogue that never existed before. And that is a really great thing because it's in Vietnam, it's in Asia, it's in Africa, all over the world. You can speak to anybody that you can sort of find and stumble upon on this medium, which is extraordinary.
Absolutely. You talked briefly about, brought up classic cars. In your old office, you had a classic car right there in the office, but in your new place, you're surrounded by this amazing collection of work. It seems like you're living in art. And I'm wondering, how does being an artist, collector, curator, all of those, how do those influence your career? Do those cross over and influence each other? Are you driven by one sort of like passion? I don't know.
Well, because I grew up isolated in the suburbs. Literally, I had a pretty lousy childhood, and my mother passed away when I was very young, and my father was just terribly unsupportive and not terribly kind, basically. So I very much lived in my own head, and I lived through just, I had this wall that was cork, and I would just rip apart magazines and collage things that caught my interest and pin them onto the wall in a way that's not so dissimilar from the artwork that I make, which is making these narrative short videos for the instant attention spans we've all grown to have. So I make these films that they go from 5 seconds to really not more than a minute, which is the duration that you can post a video on Instagram for. But I also embed them into my writing. So in a way, I created this very unique platform for myself, which is to write articles that incorporate my two-dimensional photographic computer collage work and my narrative videos embedded into the article. So in a way, I have a one-person show on ArtNet every single month. But like I said before, that I grew up like almost catatonic, not even conversing like I'm conversing to you, to anyone, until I was about 14 years old. And as a result, like having no exposure to fine art on any level whatsoever, I, as a normal kid in the suburbs, related to cars. And it was never so much, I'm not a sports person. I was overweight and a terrible athlete, and I stuttered. So I was really kind of a wreck on so many different levels. And that's why I have so much energy and exuberance, is because I'm a late bloomer, and I'm very much of the mind for kids that you should take your time and never settle. You have your whole life to live. So everyone has a passion, no matter who you are or what you do or where you come from. And the whole thing in life is to take your time, cultivate interests, no matter how disparate they are, and find something that you would do for free. Warren Buffett says this: everyone who's ever succeeded in their life does something because you have to love it. Like, love it. I love it as much as my family. It's a kind of shared fabric that I can communicate with my family about. We do shows together with my kids, but I refuse to, like I said before, to compromise. Anyway, so as a kid, I used to get Road and Track magazine, and I related to the cars, not in any, of course it feels good to go really fast in a really short period of time, I must admit. But I'm a coward, really, and I'm not like a daring do person, although you'd think so if you were behind in the car with me. But I love the industrial design aspect of cars. And again, it must have been somehow, my mom was like a hobby artist, even though no one ever was exposed to art galleries in my family. But I remember my mom distinctly like painting directly onto the wall in the basement and making a mural. And the way she dressed fashion-wise was very much, she was an aesthetically oriented person. And I loved the cars mainly for the shape and the forms that they presented. And that was really my gateway drug into fine art, because I related to just the way these things looked. They were seductive. I mean, I always think you're either a Porsche person or a Ferrari person in the classical car realm. And for me, it was the big back end of a Porsche. It was very voluptuous. And I ended up forging this incredibly close, improbable relationship with the Iraqi architect, Zaha Hadid. And she became literally my closest friend in the world. And she ended up designing 2 cars and a boat for me. And we went as far as making one-to-one scale models of the 2 cars. And they've been exhibited in the Guggenheim and museums far and wide, and I've written about it. But again, like, I mean, to be honest, I don't know that much about the history of architecture. like I do about art, and it was never a crazy area of enthusiasm for me. But I met Zaha, and I was so in awe of this human being that just created her career out of whole cloth. She didn't come from she came from a medium well-off family, but she faced such kind of derision in her career, being a woman and being an Iraqi woman in the field of architecture. And because she was so outspoken, she had this worldwide reputation for being a shrew and for screaming and yelling and being capricious and terrible. But she was one of the most extraordinary human beings I ever met. And she taught me so much about work and about life and about success and about the single-minded determinedness that it takes to achieve and accomplish anything there is. And it's no matter what you do, it's not who's smarter, who's richer, or who has better connections. It's how you just continue and persevere in the face of these obstacles. I mean, constantly people are going against me and criticizing me and literally trying to kill me. But the fact is, nothing will stop me. Like, I just will not stop because I feel so overwhelmed with a sense of purpose in what I do and how I do it.
I'm so surprised to hear how like even threatened you get, you know. Now does that have to do with the provoking the big wigs and art world people? Does that have to do with the Inigo saga? What does that come from?
Well, it's funny because I was asked to be on a panel about fake news in the fine art world and in art journalism. And I was thinking, what can I say? What's the fake news? What does that mean in the context of fine art? And I realized, I came to this kind of revelation that, like, art is the only industry that loves and embraces lies. The art world, if you go to any art fair and ask, and I'm talking about, like, I have the greatest reverence for, like, Larry Gagosian compared to all the other giant art galleries that you always hear of, like, that are ruining the whole landscape of fine art, like Hauser and Wirth and David Werner, these giant global, multi-venue institutions, how they rule the roost and represent all the talent in the art world. But Gagosian started out selling posters in the street. You know, it's a pretty extraordinary tale of self-creation that he's done. But the fact is, even if you go to any art fair and ask everyone from Gagosian to Werner to Hauser and everyone on down the pole, how did you do? What did you sell? You'll just get a boatload of lies. I sold this for 20 million. I sold that. I sold everything in my booth. And the art world just loves hyperbole and to really over dramatize things and lie, out and out lie. And also because, I mean, I don't believe that art is as unregulated as everybody says, because, I mean, Georgina Adam, the great FT journalist, has done a study that there's like 160 statutes, laws, and regulations that apply to any given commercial transaction, including those in the art world. But the fact is, I've done something which very few people have done, if at all, which is because I'm engaged in every level of this business, from being an artist, being a curator, being a dealer, being a teacher, and all of these different things, and a collector, and being old, because I've been in this business for so long, I have access. And I have access to people, and even to this day, I find it so weird that, like, people tell me shit, and, like, I have to say I'm a bit naughty, because in my last article, which you should all read, that just came out in ArtNet 2 days ago, but, like, I got in trouble because sometimes I just can't help myself. When people say off the record, I mean, I just wish they wouldn't tell me, because I'm just like a little child, and I'm like Swiss cheese. If you tell me something, it goes right through me. But the fact is that I tell the truth, and the reason that people read me and everyone, I mean, I say I'm kind of like a writer from Mechanics magazine because I'm like a trade writer, but everyone reads me in this industry and beyond a little bit because I tell the truth. And that's why I expose myself to this kind of situation where someone yells across a restaurant on Madison Avenue, literally threatening to beat me up in the middle of a restaurant. That was a lawyer called Richard Golub, who's like in his 70s, but he could probably still kick my ass. He's in such good shape. And the fact is, like, I'm only creative when I'm behind the keyboard. In real life, I run. The first thing I think of is the exit strategy on how to preserve my life. But the fact is, I can't tell myself because no one else, everyone is so cautious, like I said before, and conservative in the industry. And everybody who's in a position to tell they don't tell because they're just worried about their own ass and where they're going to make a living from, where they're going to make their next dollar from. So everybody is so invested in the continuity of this system built on lies and a lack of clarity and a lack of transparency. I have been doing this for so long. I have a vast art collection that I've acquired over the years, over my course of my career. And I make a living by selling it piecemeal. And I'm just not beholden to anyone for anything. And even when David Werner was on the phone, like about to blow a gasket because he's so pissed off that I divulged a deal that he had in Basel, I still have art on consignment at his gallery to this day. And that's really how I do it. I mean, if you're the biggest asshole in the world and you have Picasso or access to one, people will deal with you because there's a dearth of good material and the world is scurrying to get art to sell. So really, and again, if I wasn't coming, if I was mean-spirited or just self-aggrandizing, which I am a little bit, but like not more than the next person, but if I didn't care, first and foremost, I mean, it's incredible. I still can't believe the access I have to all of these people that are right at the heart of what's driving this kind of behemoth, this system of art market. I still speak to all of these zillionaires and they confide things to me, and half the time I don't say anything, but if I think it's innocuous enough or harmless, I will kind of, you know, let a few things slip into my article that I shouldn't. And really that's why people read me. And I don't even, you know, it's not gossip, I don't think in the least. It's hard facts, hard economic data, and about the social machinations of what drives our world. And I think that people just have a hunger to know on a basic level, like how does it work? What's really driving the system and what's behind, what are the forces behind
And for art students or students in general who are interested in this field and are looking to enter that system and are looking to gain some of that access and move forward, do you have any specific advice for them?
Well, again, it's like find a dream no matter how far-fetched it is, something that you could really see dedicating yourself. And a litmus test is like, what would I do in my, like for me, the worst day of the week is Sunday. When the phones go down, I mean, now every day is Sunday, so you can't go by now. But like, that's why I thrive on teaching so much, because it gives me something really to focus on when everything else is going quiet. But find within yourself what drives you, what makes you foam at the mouth and gets you excited, and what would you do in your free time, and try to find a way to transform your passion into something to get remunerated from. And if it's art, just go to galleries, go to museums, network, create a support group, put shows together in your apartment, put shows together. I mean, the students that I have in School of Visual Arts have been deprived of the thing that they've been working for 4 years, which is their senior exhibition where they get to showcase their work to the public, to a wide audience of people, not only to their peers, but to people that come scouting for talent from all the galleries. And really, that's why they've invested all of this time, all of this money, and all of this work into Fine Art School, and SVA being one of the top schools. And now they've had this opportunity taken right from under them. And the way that I've compensated is to offer them a show on my Instagram account. And again, that's a far cry from having the physical show, but they'll have the opportunity by being on my site. I don't have an enormous amount of friends, considering followers, considering the public persona I have, but still it's good enough to present a really great cross-section of people for them to have an audience that's meaningful for what they're doing. But I would say the future is technology. If anything, this ridiculous, horrible tragedy of COVID has brought upon us, it's like, who the hell knew what Zoom was like a month ago? I certainly did it. Maybe you guys did because of your generation. But I tell you that, like, I got so scared, like in a very basic, fundamental sense, right before I was supposed, first I find out I'm teaching the class. Then I find out it's 6 fucking hours long. Then I find out it's a fine art workshop and I've never taken a fine art class in my life. And then all of a sudden there's a virus and I can't even meet the class. I have to acclimate myself to Canvas and all these new softwares within which to communicate with my students that I'll never even see. And they are from far and wide, from China and Asia and from all over the universe. And I have to say it was pretty daunting and I was taken aback and I got a really nervous feeling in my stomach. And I said to the head of the department, I'm not sure I could do this. And I really was scared. I didn't think I would be able to just get on Zoom, to be honest with you. I had to get, and then he said, you know what? I think it's better that we replace you with someone who's a little more Zoom-centric, who's a little more familiar and comfortable with the technology. And I said, can I just have until 12 o'clock noon the following day? And I thought about it, and noon passed, and by 3 or 4 o'clock, I said, you know what? I'm going to do it. I'm going to try it, because I think historically, I mean, you're so young, when you're going to be telling your grandkids, oh, when I was young and there was this virus and I couldn't go to college and hamburgers were only $9.50 and blah, blah. I mean, it's a historic moment that we're all living through. And it's so crazy, because for someone who really doesn't believe, I'm agnostic. I don't believe in religion, other than fine art is really like my God and my religion in such a deep sense. But isn't it weird that, like, I have to say, for the last 10 years of my life, I had been to an airport literally every 3 weeks for 5 years. I was supposed to have a show of my own art in Tokyo at Blum and Poe Gallery on March 13th. Then I was supposed to give a lecture in Cologne in April. Then I was supposed to curate a show in Brussels a day later. Just before this happened, I was in 7 countries in 7 days. I was all over Europe, and then I was in London, gave a lecture in Barcelona, flew to Brussels, went to Germany, went to Switzerland, flew to Tokyo, was in Tokyo for a week, came back to the States and was meant to be here for a matter of weeks before I had to go back to Tokyo. And all of a sudden, this kind of like frenetic, crazy, unhealthy. I love globalization, and I think that there's no difference between someone here in Africa or anywhere else in the world being your age, my age. We're all physiologically the same. We have many similar, desires on so many different levels. And yet at the same time, even though like I was very much a proponent of a healthy notion of globalization, I mean, it's so crazy when you think about it that everything just came to a standstill. The airs are clear, the waters are clear, pollution is getting better, people are having to relate to their families, to their spouses, albeit the divorce rate is skyrocketing in a lot of jurisdictions. But like, this is really a kind of reassessment of life. Even though it's forced upon us, and there's a lot of death and destruction and a lot of, I'm not going to say it's a happy kind of confluence of things, but it's given everyone some time to take stock of what it is we're doing, why. And I have to say, like, I'm grateful that I've been through some terrible family situations in the past year, and having this time just to sit and look at my computer or just look out the window, it's giving me a lot of chance to ruminate and just to think and figure out, like, put things into perspective about why we do what we do, how we do it, what are the reasons that are underpinning our aspirations and our desires, and how we're going to accomplish things in the future, how things are going to be different, and hopefully we'll come out of this as better people and a better society on some level. Now I sound like I'm running for office. Who's talking?
And from your Instagram stories, it seems like you've remained optimistic about the future of art post COVID-19 and the direction New York is taking right now.
I mean, I have to say, like, if you read the newspapers and you're not from New York City, you would think that people are keeling over in the street dying, and that people are smashing on the hospital doors like in the Dawn of the Dead series of movies to get care. And it's just absolutely not like that. Sure, the streets are unorthodoxly quiet as opposed to what they were a month and a half ago or a month ago. Of course, things have quieted down. More than ever, you see people donning masks and gloves, etc. But like, life goes on, and people are so resilient. And that's such a great aspect of humanity. Is just like when I teach my class and the kids are making work in their apartments, in their houses, in their hallways, in their showers, literally on their balconies, we can get through a lot of different things. And humanity, the world has been around for so many thousands of years, and this is going to be a hiccup. I mean, again, not to belittle in any which way what we're going through. The plague in 1918, the Spanish flu, even though it probably didn't originate in Spain, there was 150 to 100 million people perished in this time. Right now, we've had like a little over 80,000 deaths, which is a terrible, terrible thing, but life will go on in any which way. It'll change and it'll be impacted. Many people have lost loved ones and family members, and that's a tragedy, and that's just awful, and there's no way to describe my condolences or how badly I feel for people. And my son has corona right now, and he's had it for 3.5 weeks and still can't shake it. But thank God he's been okay and able to work. through it. And at the same time, I'm very grateful that he's with his friends, quarantining, so he's in a very comfortable social context. But I just think like when a rock pops up in the stream goes around it, and humans are very resilient, and that's a really great attribute of people and animals. And when I just love being here in New York City, I don't wish that I was somewhere else. And like you said before, like before I let you go, I'll do a lap around my office with my computer in my hand and look at where I am. But like literally, there's not a day that's gone by, today included, that I haven't just looked at an artwork closely. And I just love being where I am because it's like being in a three-dimensional manifestation of my brain. It's just all of these things are so meaningful to me, and they really just encapsulate everything I love. There's text up, and again, like something that's really important to me. And back to these ideas about like how can you guys get started, or I don't differentiate between a spoon, a car, a chair, a poster, a print, a painting. I have like a Christopher Wool poster that says spokesman. I like it because I consider myself a bit of a spokesman for the art world, but it's a poster that was an invitation from a 1989 exhibition he had in Germany. And I look at that and I derive as much pleasure from looking at this framed poster as I would if it was a $20 million painting on aluminum. I don't really differentiate in this kind of, the art world turns their noses up at drawings and prints and editions. And in my office alone, I have like drawings on little receipts, scraps of paper, little canvases, little sculptures. There's nothing grandiose, nothing wildly expensive, but it just fulfills me in a way that I just really can't even explain, though I've tried, certainly not been for loss of words over this past hour. But I just think if there's any advice, it's just dig deep in yourself and you'll find something, whether it's charity, whether it's teaching, whether it's mathematics or computers or, you know, being a gardener or any damn thing it is that you love to do, that gives you a joy and a satisfaction, and make that your life as much as you can.
But is there anything else you would like to share with, anything you'd like to plug, anything you'd like to share with the students, with anyone watching?
Well, I would just say, number one, like I'm not kidding when I say contact me. My name is just my name. My account on Instagram is just my name. I will respond to each and every DM. No question is stupid or inappropriate unless you're threatening to like shoot me. But like, don't be shy and don't be intimidated. So much of the world is about this kind of like, again, like why do I hate authority so much? Not because I was beaten, picked on and bullied and, you know, come from a very, an upbringing that wasn't very, I wasn't encouraged basically in all respects. But that didn't stop me. I had a creative writing class in university and my teacher told me I shouldn't be a writer. And don't let anything get in the way of your self-belief. I mean, my self-esteem has been monumentally low until like 5 years ago. So you just can't get thwarted by anyone. Nothing, you can't let anything, if you feel badly, if you're having issues, mental health issues or feeling, seek help, go share it with someone. I've actually lost a child to these kind of issues that was at the top of like success for someone his age, but he just never expressed the difficulties he was going through. And reach out, don't be shy. Don't be shy to ask for help. Don't be shy to ask someone a question. Don't be intimidated. Don't be scared of these people in positions of authority that get off on keeping other people down at someone's expense. Just find something you like and don't stop. Like Zaha didn't build a building for 35 years. She won competitions they would take away from her. I was told I couldn't be a writer. My dad came to me at one point to try to force me out of the art world because I wasn't making a living in the beginning. But there was no choice. I never even considered it for a second to stop what I was doing because I just knew I could not only couldn't die, but I wouldn't. And really, that's the only advice I can give you is just do it. Don't be scared, don't be shy, and don't listen to anyone because honestly, I'm a perfect example of someone that you could do anything you want. I mean, I'm not the brightest, I'm not the most erudite, but I won't stop and I won't take no for an answer. And I think that's something very important to convey to people.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kenny.
Before we go, like
oh yeah.
Chris, but like, can you see?
Yes. Oh my gosh. And this is right in your office.
There's a prototype I saw.
And maybe even the story of that painting that's out on the balcony.
Well, this is a really funny story that one of my kids made a painting and left it outside. The child, I lost one of my children a little over a year ago, and he was an artist at Slade, one of the best art schools in the world. And he had always been painting outside and using the weather to impact upon the work he was making. And it was really part of, he used the chance and kind of improbability of weather conditions to really affect the surfaces of the paintings he was making. So my 20-year-old son, Gabriel, made this painting and left it outside. And when I moved to London, I had so much crap, my art collection, just buried piece on top of piece. But this piece of Gabriel's had just been living outside for over a year, and it was musty and moldy. And when I moved, it took literally 4 months to dig through the heaps. I thought I was going to die by a pile of art falling on my head like a hoarder, which is, I had an exhibition, a sale at Sotheby's online only called The Hoarder, where I auctioned off 115 pieces with no reserve in my collection, so people with no money or little money were able to acquire art worth thousands, literally for hundreds. Like my loss was their gain. But when I moved to New York, I see this like beautifully packed painting, and I opened it up, and it was Gabriel's moldy painting that had been outside, and it wasn't supposed to be packed as such. It was supposed to be put into storage in London. And then I decided to hang the painting outside, and I did so in a way that like the painting begins to deteriorate and entropy in a way like we do. I mean, every day you're alive, you're getting closer towards death. Even you young, good-looking kids that are my audience for this interview. So anyway, Duchamp said that art in a museum should have a shelf life of 50 years, and he was very much against the preciousness of art. And a lot of the artists I really respond to, from Paul Tech, showing the vulnerability of the body by depicting a cross-section of human flesh. And I just love, like, so this painting basically blows off my wall every other day. And I do this kind of ritual where I go out in the morning and film it and hang this painting every day. And in a way, it brings me closer to my son that made it. It makes me mindful of the son that I lost. And it just makes me think that art is just not something to put upon on a pedestal and revere, but it's something to engage with, it's something to live with, it's something to touch, to smell. And I just love this kind of human interaction that brings me, and I just like the fact that this painting is decaying like I am over the course of not shutting up for over an hour talking to you. And that we're all going through this process, whether it's this virus that we're living through or just, you know, like, what do you call it? When you're wearing away like the tide is what's the word I'm looking for? A rare time that I have erosion. So we're like humanly eroding. This painting is slowly changing over time, and there's something beautiful about seeing the transformation of a physical object through natural occurrences like life. And that's what art is for me. It really is my life. Of course, it's through my circulatory system, and it's the only thing I do 7 days a week with great pleasure and satisfaction, including speaking to you. Thank you for listening.
That was awesome.